Hello and welcome. I'm Melanie Carter, an account manager here at EDC and the moderator of today's discussion. Our topic today is all about selling to the U.S. We're going to look at why the U.S. is the top export market for Canadians. We'll learn about the growth opportunities and how you can get started. But first, please note we are broadcasting today's session using simultaneous French translation. So if you'd like to listen en français, simply click on the français button on your screen. Alors, pour notre auditoire francophone, nous offrons une traduction simultanée disponible sur votre écran. Veuillez tout simplement choisir le bouton français. For those of you not familiar with EDC, we help Canadian companies of all sizes sell their products and services internationally. Every year, we help more than 7,000 Canadian businesses selling to markets worldwide, and we help protect and grow their international sales. Today, we begin the second of 3 webinars for exporters. If you missed our webinar last week, don't worry. That webinar is now available to view on demand. So let's get started. On the panel today, we have 4 guests who will share their insights and experience with you. First, we have Jason Myers, President and CEO of the Canadian Manufacturers and Exporters, or CME. Jason is calling us today from his office in Toronto. Welcome, Jason.
Hi, Melanie.
And in our studio, we have Gary Brown, the Chief Representative for the United States at EDC. Welcome, Gary.
Glad to be here, Melanie.
Also joining us from Toronto, we have Bill Maheras, a Trade Commissioner from the Trade Commissioner Service. Welcome, Bill.
Hi, Melanie.
And last but not least, in our Toronto studio, we have Issacs Story, an experienced exporter and co-founder of Open Farms, Inc. and Canada Pooch. Welcome, Isaac.
Hi, Melanie. Thanks for having me.
And I'd also like to welcome you, participants. We are happy that you're able to join us today. Today, we'll be covering the U.S. economy and its global impact, why the U.S. market is so attractive for Canadian companies, the current opportunities that can be found in the U.S., ways to enter the market, and Isaac's export journey. We will then go to a question and answer period where you can ask questions live to our guests. So throughout the discussion, take notes and make sure you get an answer to your questions later. Let's start with Jason, who's going to cover the economic outlook for the U.S. Jason, tell us about the economic story for the U.S. and what that means for Canadian companies.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Melanie. I have to say this is a really good time for this call and this discussion. I think with the economic uptick in the U.S. that we're seeing right now, this is an excellent time for Canadian companies to look at how they position themselves in the market, maybe reposition themselves in the market as growth continues. And of course, the U.S. is a major economy. It's one that is on our doorstep. An $8 trillion economy that accounts for about a fifth of the total economic activity in the world. It's the largest consumer economy. It's the second largest manufacturing economy in the world. So there are really good reasons, apart from the fact that the U.S. is our neighbor and our biggest trading partner, that we should be paying attention to this. The other reason, of course, is the U.S. is a major importer of goods and services, about $2.4 trillion of goods and services last year, and Canada accounts for about a fifth of that, about $450 billion worth of imports, again, of goods and services. So, again, this is, and I don't think I have to tell anybody how important the U.S. is to the Canadian economy. But probably even more important over the year ahead. You know, we have a fairly slowly growing economy here in Canada. Our domestic economy has taken a hit primarily as a result of lower energy prices. Well, the U.S. economy has taken a bit of a hit too, but not nearly as much as the Canadian economy has. So this year, in 2015, the EDC, and I agree with the forecast. I think it's a general agreement that the U.S. economy is going to grow about 2.5% in 2015. That's going to ramp up next year. The outlook is for 2.93% growth, and both of those numbers are pretty much double of what can be expected in the Canadian economy. So the U.S. economy is big and it's growing, and in fact, is going to post in terms of absolute dollar numbers of in terms of economic activity, GDP, as well as imports, the strongest growth of major economies around the world. So again, a good reason to pay attention to it. So what's driving the U.S. economy? A lot of people would say that even 2.5%, 2.9, 3% growth really isn't that strong a growth rate. But I think if you look under those numbers, what you'll see is, first of all, a consumer sector that is picking up. I know there's still some questions about whether the retail side is as strong as it should be in the U.S. But what we've been seeing over the past 3 or 4 years is a continued growth in consumer incomes. U.S. consumers are paying down their debt. And stronger consumer spending, although some of that income growth is being saved, and that's one of the reasons why it's taken so long for consumer spending to pick up. We're also seeing a stronger housing sector, a stronger construction sector. And when you couple that with stronger manufacturing activity in the United States, what you see is, and I know our other panelists will talk to this as well, more and more capacity constraints within the U.S. market. And all of those factors are positive for Canadian companies that are looking to export to the United States. And of course, on top of all of that, I have to mention too the fact that the Canadian dollar has fallen to around 75 cents against the U.S. dollar. That's also a very positive factor for exporters. It's going to make our goods, our services, much more competitive in the U.S. market. So all of those are very, very good signals. And when you look at our our non-energy exports,
right,
which are really the exports of manufactured products into the U.S., those have actually grown by about 28% since January of last year, and in fact they're up about 12% since this January. So we are seeing strong growth in the U.S. Industrial products and auto, aerospace, advanced technologies, and machinery equipment, consumer products, building materials. All of those exports right now are experiencing double-digit growth. Now, I know others are going to be talking about this, but I do want to flag a couple of things. One is that there are big regional differences in the U.S., and no Canadian company should be looking at the United States as a single market. Nobody would look at Canada as a single market. Very important to look at regional differences, and some of that stronger growth is occurring in the southern states and in some of the western states as well. And on top of that, there are some big demands that we're seeing. Aging population, U.S. government's taking action on climate change and improving environmental performance. As in Canada, demands for health care, better water security, food security. So these are areas, and of course infrastructure investment. These are areas that will create unique opportunities for niche products and technologies from Canada. So I think the U.S. is a good bet for growth. I think this is a good time for Canadian companies to prepare. Again, not to be treated as one market. I think it's also important that Canadian exporters don't see the U.S. as a market where it's business as usual. This is a very, very competitive market. Our dollar is down, but so are other currencies. Competition is tough in the U.S. It's a highly competitive market. So know your risks: the currency risks, the customs risks, the legal risks of doing business there. Know your customers. I think that's extremely important for anyone doing business, of course. And prepare to offer your customers solutions. You're not going to be competitive in the U.S. if you are simply trying to sell standardized products or standardized services. You really need to look at how you can specialize your products, your services, provide a solution. And today, that means a combination, at least on the manufacturing side, a combination of good manufacturing, good design, good service, and more integrated technology.
Well, that's great insight there, Jason. I really appreciate it. So now that we know what growth in the U.S. means for us, let's talk to Gary about the growing opportunities and where those opportunities can be found. So, Gary, research does show that for most Canadian companies, the U.S. market is going to be the very first market into which they start exporting. So please tell us a little bit what makes the U.S. so attractive and where that growth can be.
Well, I think number one is Canadians' familiarity with the U.S. market. I mean, they're our neighbor right next door. A lot of us have traveled to the U.S. I mean, socially, television, all those kinds of things, we're very familiar with what the U.S. is. And you know, that proximity as well, it's literally just across the border. And you know, in a truck you could access a huge amount of the U.S., probably all of it within 48 hours, a lot of it within 24 hours. So it's very close, right next door. And as we heard Jason say, you know, the largest consumer economy in the world, that, you know, booming might be a little strong right now, but is doing very well. So there's all kinds of opportunities across virtually all sectors in the U.S. Right now. You know, there are differences regionally, as Jason mentioned. I think we could all understand that New England would be a different market than California, than Texas, than Florida possibly. So you need to focus on where you think you can access that market as a first step. Unlikely that you're going to be able to cover the whole market right out of the gate, but by focusing on an area that makes the most sense for whatever it is that goods or services that you're selling.
Jason mentioned many different areas or industries that will be having a lot of growth in the U.S. So I'm assuming that depending on the market, some sectors or some areas will be more successful than others.
Yeah, sure. There's concentrations in different parts of the market. High tech in California obviously would be a region. If you're in high tech, that's probably where you're going to look to go for your focus. You know, and even oil and gas right now in the U.S. is down, but it's still a relatively small portion of the overall economy. But there's still opportunities in oil and gas. If you can be innovative and show that efficiencies and save companies money, there's opportunities there as well.
Very good. So do you have any tips on how companies can get a leg up and be competitive against other companies who are trying to sell into the same market?
Well, I think they really have to realize that when they get an opportunity to enter a market, whether it's, you know, they attend a trade show, they get some introductions, you know, Bill's going to talk later about the Trade Commissioner Service and what they can provide, they really have to be prepared. You have to think of it as this is your 15 minutes, and what is that prospect that you talk to if it's at a trade show? What are they going to take away from that meeting with you? Are they going to remember you as the person who can make a difference for them? If it's just somebody else that they talked to and got a business card from, there's thousands of people there. You need to differentiate yourself. Be prepared, and don't just think you can go and just wing it, because the successful companies don't approach things that way.
As we were talking before this interview, you did mention an example of a company that had a great solution to offer, and they got their 5-minute with a big CEO of a company, right? And it didn't go so well?
Yeah, they got the opportunity at a trade show. We facilitated an introduction. The potential buyer indicated they wanted to see them based on the profile that they'd provided. And, you know, technical kind of engineers had started the company, and young guys, you know, very bright, but they spent most of the time apologizing for being a small company, but they would really try hard. And when that executive walked away, that was the impression he was going to be left. Well, it's a small company, they'll really try hard, but they don't really have much experience. And I mean, I watched it fall apart in front of me. So
your feedback to them was?
What you have to be prepared. What were the 2 or 3 things that you wanted that executive to remember about your company? Because that isn't what he remembered today.
Right. No, that's very valuable feedback that you're providing them, and I hope that others will be learning from that feedback that you're giving now. So, Gary, to recap, it's of utmost importance to do research, right? No 2 states are exactly the same, is what I heard. So, for Canadian companies who need to find out where in the U.S. it will be most favorable to sell their products and services, if you're looking for more information, actually we have a white paper that's offered at EDC, right? And that white paper has valuable information, and it can be actually uploaded from the webinar console, I believe, on the bottom of your screen. So let's now look at ways to break into the market to take advantage of those opportunities that Gary and Jason covered. For this, we will talk with Bill. Bill, first off, can you tell us a little bit about the Trade Commissioner Service, or TCS, and how you work with Canadian companies?
Sure, Melanie, happy to. The Trade Commissioner Service has been around for over 100 years, operating worldwide, assisting Canadian companies to develop their business, to grow their business, expand their business in both the U.S. and international markets. We have an international presence of about 150 Canadian trade offices all around the world, and we have 16 Canadian trade offices in the United States alone. So each of these trade offices provides a row of services for Canadian companies, including helping to prepare them for international markets, helping them assess their market potential, and to determine, for example, if their product, service, or technology can be sold into that market. We also provide companies with qualified contacts. So as you know, when a company expands internationally, they're often looking for a contact, say, for example, a qualified accountant to help them establish their accounting system in that foreign market, or qualified legal services. And more specifically, Canadian companies may be looking for distributors or manufacturers, reps, or agents in the United States or in other countries. Our embassies, consulates, and trade offices abroad and in the United States provide a qualified list of these contacts, and really that's probably the most valuable service that we can provide to Canadian companies to help them expand abroad. We also provide a service where we help Canadian companies resolve problems in the market, and this could be something as simple as my goods are stuck in a warehouse somewhere. Why are they stuck? Can you help get them released? All the way up to what we call trade policy issues, where we may be seeing issues around, say, for example, Buy American in the U.S. market, where we see that particular non-tariff barrier or that particular challenge is very common to Canadian companies across an industry sector, and that becomes a trade policy issue that we then take up to our trade negotiators. So the next time we talk to the American authorities, we have a position on that particular area where we can articulate, Canada's issues or complaints with that particular sector. So there's a real gamut of a wide range of services that we provide, but it's important for Canadian companies to know that we are there for them. We're accessible through tradecommissioner.gc.ca, and we have 16 offices in the United States that cover the whole U.S. geographic area. So that's the important takeaway for Canadian companies.
And then when is it a good time for a Canadian company to call you? At the very beginning, as part of the research, or once they've found customers?
Yes, really the best time, Melanie, for a Canadian company to call us is when they're actually have an established presence in Canada. They have a product, service, or technology that has been around for a while, and they've got a good level of business already going in Canada, and now they're thinking of taking the first step in terms of exporting to, say, the U.S. market or any other market. So at that point, they should call us and have an initial consultation with us, because we can help them save time and money in preparing for those markets. We actually have quantified that. We save Canadian companies 18 to 20% of their startup costs in terms of assisting them with the information that they need before they enter the market. Frankly, I deal with a lot of Canadian companies who have problems after the fact, after they've gone into the United States market or an international market and they have problems. It's much more difficult and much more expensive for a Canadian company to solve a problem after the fact than to be prepared in the first place.
Excellent. So what would be the best way for a Canadian company to break into the U.S. market?
Well, typically a Canadian company can take a foothold in the U.S. market through really one of four ways. The first way is to sell direct from Canada. In other words, to have no physical presence in the United States. And when we think, for example, of direct mail, or we think of e-commerce type of technologies for products and services, that's kind of the first way. So without even stepping on U.S. soil or having a presence there, the Canadian company can sell direct. Now, it depends on the sector, but this could be a little bit limiting in terms of what a company can do in terms of its growth in the U.S. The second way is to use a rep or a distributor. A rep is a manufacturer's rep. It's just a short term for manufacturer's rep, or a distributor. So manufacturer's reps are very common in the United States, and they work in particular sectors, so they work on a sector basis or even a subsector basis, and they typically have a specific territory that they cover. Using a rep or distributor is probably the most common way for Canadian small and medium-sized companies to enter the U.S. market. It's very, very common, particularly in the manufacturing sector. Now, the third way to establish a presence in the United States is to literally open up a U.S. office. So this would be opening up a U.S. branch or subsidiary of your company, or establishing a separate subsidiary, such as a corporation. This is quite common in the Canadian retail sector. We see this, for example, think of TD Bank. TD Bank has a presence across the whole eastern seaboard in the United States, and it's a growing presence actually there. My understanding actually is that TD Bank has more bank branches in the United States than they do in Canada, so that's quite interesting. So that's the third way of establishing a U.S. presence, literally opening up an office, your office in the U.S.
Right.
And the fourth way is through what we call selling through strategic alliances. So think here of, for example, selling through licensing or selling through franchising or establishing a joint venture or a partnership with a U.S. company. So it's essentially you've established a partnership of some sort and you're selling product, service, or technology through that partnership.
And all this applies to a company that does manufacturing as well as it does for a company that offers services, correct?
I'm sorry, can you repeat that, please?
Yes, of course. So there's a lot of mentions about selling goods and manufacturers and so on, but a company that offers services will be able to take these advice and use them as well, correct?
Yeah, this applies to a service company as well, and yeah, absolutely. The same advice applies to service companies.
Excellent. So what would be, or do you have 3 pieces of advice that you would like to provide to a Canadian company who's seeking to expand its business into the U.S. market?
I will, actually, yeah, absolutely. And in fact, I'll give you 4 pieces of advice, a bonus.
I like that even better.
I guess the first is, and the other speakers might have mentioned as well, you know, number one, do not underestimate the U.S. market. This is a very large market. It's highly competitive, and it's also very highly litigious. U.S. companies will not hesitate to go through the legal process to get redress if something goes wrong with the delivery of product, service, or technology. So you have to be, you know, aware of that. Don't forget the U.S. is a very highly innovative and R&D intensive market. If you think your product or technology specifically has some advantage in the U.S. market, you need to really check it out first to make sure it does, because more than likely there's already a company in the U.S. who produces it locally and better at a lower cost. I would also say don't rely solely on the weak Canadian dollars. I know Jay was mentioning about the advantage of the Canadian dollar, but you know, we really want Canadian companies to be in the U.S. market on a more permanent, long-term basis. And frankly, Canadian companies that export solely on the basis of a weak Canadian dollar really have to think hard about their strategy, because what happens when the dollar goes back up to par again? Well, they're knocked out of the U.S. market, so they have to think very, very strongly about that. Okay. Secondly, don't try to take on the whole U.S. market at once. This is a vast market. You know, we're talking about, for example, one state, California, has a bigger population and a bigger GDP than all of Canada. So, you know, when I hear companies telling me we're going to export our product or technology to all the U.S., the whole U.S., I know that they haven't done their research. I know that they haven't thought about their strategy at that point. Thirdly, be very careful about and selective about choosing your intermediaries, such as reps and distributors. This, from my experience, I have 14 years in the U.S. market working with Canadian companies. This is the area where most Canadian SMEs fall flat. They fail to do due diligence to properly select their manufacturers, reps, and distributors in the U.S. They're not choosing the people that represent them properly, and it's critically important that Canadian companies choose a partner, a distributor, a rep who represents them, because they are the face of your company in that market. So everything they do represents your company, so you have to be very, very careful about choosing those organizations. And again, the Trade Commissioner Service can help by providing you with qualified lists of distributors, agents, reps, intermediaries in your subsector. I would also say that, you know, you need to take, and this would apply to the U.S. market and probably every international market, before you make major decisions like hiring people who are going to represent you as an agent or a rep, you know, fly down and meet them. The investment that you're going to make in meeting them face-to-face and seeing their facilities is going to pay off in a lot in terms of the future. It's really important to meet them face-to-face and know who you're dealing with. Now, the fourth piece of advice, the extra piece of advice, the bonus piece of advice, was to really make sure that your company has the extra production capacity to take on a U.S. order. Don't forget that many U.S. orders are much, much larger than what you're typically used to dealing in Canada. I've heard in the past of Canadian companies that have been financially ruined because they've decided to accept a very large U.S. order, and they've had to ramp up their production, and they've had to really adjust their the way they operate to meet this order. Many of them have not made it, and in fact, that large order was not met, and they are basically they were shut out of the market in the future. So be really careful about the size of the orders you're taking on. Make sure that you have a plan to ramp up your production capacity, including your personnel, your capital equipment, like machinery, for example, to take on those orders.
That's a really fair point, yes.
And just finally, I would add kind of really very quickly, there's a mission called the New Exporters to Border States, which is run by the Ontario government. And so for Ontario companies, it's an excellent mission that every company thinking of expanding into the United States should take. The next one runs February 18th and 19th, 2-day mission. It goes to Buffalo, and it's very cost-effective and provides you with all the information that you would need to consider expanding your business to the U.S.
Do you mind?
And also online.
Sorry, Bill. Do you mind mentioning the name of the mission once again?
Yes, it's called New Exporters to Border States.
Okay, excellent. Thank you.
NEBS, New Exporters to Border States. And the next mission is February 18th and 19th. If you just Google New Exporters to Border States for Ontario companies, that will come up as the first hit on the Google. And then finally, exporting to the U.S., we actually have an online guide that is available on our Trade Commissioner Service website, tradecommissioner.gc.ca. Just Google Exporting to the U.S. guide, and that will come up, and that's got a lot of great pointers in there to help Canadian companies with all sorts of aspects of doing business in the U.S. Some of the things that I've touched on now, like choosing distributors, methods of entry, even issues about crossing the border, because I've dealt with many Canadian companies lately who've had issues in terms of crossing the border and the documentation required to do business in the U.S. through a B-1 visa. So there you go.
So lots of information to be shared. You noted very, very good points there. So once again, I do encourage you to contact the TCS and to also go to the website to get more information about the U.S. market specifically or others as well. So now let's look at what happens when theory turns into reality. Let's hear from Isaac to learn about his exporting experience. Isaac, tell us a little bit about your companies, Open Farm and Canada Pooch.
Sure, Melanie. So thank you very much again for having me. Both Canada Pooch and Open Farm, our mission is to create amazing products that delight our customers, that improve the lives of pets, and that just really improve the experiences that people have with their pets. And that takes a different form in each company. At Open Farm, we're producing premium pet foods that are at the leading edge of animal nutrition and of ethical sourcing. At Canada Pooch, we're the leading producer and designer of branded pet accessories and apparel in Canada and growing rapidly abroad. The common thread between both of our businesses is that increasingly you're seeing that individuals are treating pets just like any other member of the family. They're willing to spend and they're happy to invest in their pets' health, well-being, and in the experiences that they share together. And so that's a trend that we tapped into in Canada, but are seeing explosive growth in that trend in the U.S. and other markets around the world as well.
That's great. So why is it that you decided to start exporting to begin with?
So our view from day one, and it kind of goes in a different direction than what some of the speakers have said. I mean, our view has been Canada is a great market, but if we close ourselves off to the rest of the world, we're really limiting our growth. And we've always taken the view that as a Canadian company, if we're coming up with great products, unique and differentiated value-added products and services, we could stand out and compete and win in any market in the world. And we've actually seen that, whether it's in the U.S. or other markets, Canada is actually perceived, very, very well. People, appreciate the quality, our integrity as a country. And so we've actually had a lot of success exporting. And I guess our export journey really started, like many others, at an international trade show. It was down in Orlando about 4 years ago. We met customers from around the world, and funnily enough, I guess, the only order we locked down was actually with a pet supply distributor in Russia. And it was a very large transaction for us at the time. It was a really interesting deal from negotiation stage all the way through to ultimately delivering the product. And that further just helped open our eyes and see the real opportunity there is if you're aggressive in expanding your business beyond Canada. And since that time, we've grown Canada Pooch to now export to the U.S. As well as all across Europe, the U.K., Asia, South America. And it's also given us the confidence to take a different approach with Open Farm, which we launched about 2 years ago. Right out of the gate, we've attacked both the U.S. and Canadian markets in parallel with lots of success. I mean, today the U.S. market accounts for about 80-85% of our revenue, and it is very true that we've taken tailored approaches to different regions in the U.S. Through the launch of Open Farm.
Very insightful. So tell me what was the most challenging thing you faced when you first got started and what you learned from it?
So it's a great question. I think the truth is that every single market we've entered has posed challenges, and they've been specific and unique challenges. And so I think the overarching thing is that leaving the Canadian market, you're leaving your comfort zone and you're entering markets where business is done differently. There are different players, consumer preferences may be different. The competitive landscape is certainly different. And so our biggest task whenever we're thinking about a new market is really doing our homework and making sure we understand the consumers, distribution channels, the competitive landscape. And as the last speaker alluded to, our key to success in any market where we've been successful has been finding great on the ground local distributors, retailers, reps or sales groups, people who know the markets and who could really help us have a successful launch and guide us in those early days. And so that's really been true in all the markets where we've done well.
So Isaac, Bill had mentioned how important it was to do due diligence on your agent or representatives, distributors. So how did you go about doing that? Is it because you were meeting them, or did you go through services like the Trade Commissioner Service to find them? How did you go about that?
So we've honestly, it's very important, I think, to go beyond the high-level web research that I think is an easy thing to do in a few minutes. It's really important to put yourself out there, go to industry conferences, talk to people in the industry, and across the entire value chain of the industry. And that's the only way you really learn how industries work from region to region. Interestingly enough, the Russian pet distributor, we did work with the Trade Commissioner's office in learning more about that customer, that market, delivering to that market. So it was actually a huge value add to us in the early days of our business. But at the end of the day, it's really rolling up your sleeves and diving into the market and talking to people, because you won't find answers online for this.
Right. So is there three key things that you would like to tell a new exporter that is attempting to export for the first time?
Sure. So, the first one, and it's been said already during this hour, but the first thing is certainly do your homework. Don't just dive in. Invest that extra time and money up front to make sure you are learning about the market. You're putting together a good entry strategy. It will take some time and money up front, but it will save you a lot of pain in the long run. The second thing is to really think about your financing early. And I say that because our experience has been that traditional financing solutions here in Canada won't really be a great fit necessarily when you're exporting to foreign countries. And it could be
for a startup, you mean, or because you're an exporter?
As an exporter, when you're dealing with foreign purchase orders, foreign accounts receivable, foreign inventory, inventory held in one of your export markets. Our experience at least has been that traditional lenders are not always comfortable with that here in Canada. So whether it's beginning to cultivate relationships with U.S. lenders or Canadian non-traditional lenders, I could say EDC has been a great support for us in our businesses. You want to start doing that early because when you get those orders, you want to be worried about execution and delivery and not financing. So I can't emphasize that enough. We start our process in terms of locking down financing 8 months before we expect to get orders, just knowing that we might need to navigate some stormy waters to get there. And the final piece of advice, I guess, or the thing that we've learned is that for me, and I'm a lawyer by trade, but the most painful part is the regulatory, customs, legal compliance. But it's so important if you want to be able to scale your export business quickly, and to operate in a professional way with your customers. And so don't try to do it by yourself. Go out, find experts, service providers who could guide you through everything from basically everything to get your product from point A to B across borders in a cost-efficient and seamless way. And that's everything from packaging and labeling regulations to customs clearance. There's things that you probably won't even have thought of that if you find experts, they'll be able to guide you and give you support as you enter a new market.
Great advice. Thank you so much for sharing, Isaac. I know that testimonials like this have a great impact on companies who are not too sure how to go about things, and seeing someone who's very successful at it is always very insightful. So thank you. In today's session, we wanted to discuss opportunities in the U.S. and how you can get started. I hope we've accomplished that, and then you can use some of the information learned today to build your own business strategy. And don't forget, whether you're currently exporting or thinking of getting started, EDC can help. We have a suite of products and solutions available, from protecting you against not getting paid to helping you gain access to more financing and working capital from your bank with our guarantees. Isaac kind of mentioned the guarantee portion of how we can support you. So do give us a call at 1-800-229-0575, and we are more than happy to help. So now is the time to start our open question period, and we'll try to squeeze in as many questions as we can. If you'd like to ask a question, please click on the Q&A button on the lower left-hand side of the screen. So let's begin. Let me see what we have here first. Okay, so we are a craft brewery in our third year in business. What is the best way to get into the U.S. market, to export from Canada, or to develop a production capability or partnership in the U.S.? So Bill, let me turn that to you for a first answer.
Well, I mean, the craft brewery market is very competitive in the United States. There's a lot of local brewers already there. I think your company will also face some challenges around U.S. FDA regulations. So, obviously anything that could be consumed or has a medical application has to pass through U.S. FDA. So I think you need to do a little bit of research initially to find out what's required and what's possible in the United States. You also have to look at pricing strategies as well, because craft brewers tend to be a little more expensive in Canada than in the U.S. So it could very well be, after the shipping costs and all the regulatory compliance that you'd have to do with FDA, that your product may not be competitive price-wise in the U.S. So there's a few things to look at here. I think if you're based in Ontario, I would say your first point of contact should be the Ontario Ministry of Agriculture, Food and Rural Affairs. They have a export marketing unit, and they specialize in assisting companies just like yours that are in the food and beverage sector. That would be first point of contact if you're in Ontario. And I believe other provinces will also have a comparative ministry or department which handles food and beverage or agricultural product exports.
Thank you for your answer. Is there anyone else that needed to or wanted to add anything to this? Gary, is that not necessarily?
I think answered by Bill. Doing your homework in a circumstance like this, lots of variables in that kind of a circumstance. Being a consumable might be the biggest challenge there.
Excellent. So a question that will go to Jay and Gary. We've heard a couple times that the U.S. will be at capacity and how that will give opportunities to Canada. So what does that mean exactly? What do you mean by the U.S. is at capacity in many areas?
Well, it's Jay. Let me take a first crack at that. I think it really depends by industry. Right now, the automotive sector across North America is doing very, very well. A very large part of that is because of the pickup in consumer spending in the U.S. And what is happening in the United States is a lot of the parts companies especially are reaching their production capacity. It's difficult for them to continue to produce without adding new production facilities or new production capacity somewhere in the supply chain. And I think that does open up opportunities, has been opening up opportunities for a number of Canadian companies who can take advantage of some of that some of the opportunity there. Although with auto parts, especially, it's important to be close to your customer at the end of the day. I think there are other areas as well, and if you take a look at where the fastest growth is occurring on the industrial side, there is quite a bit of investment that is going on in new automation systems, for example, more advanced production equipment in the United States, and those are some of the areas where I think Canadian companies that can provide unique technologies that are working in the field of information technology and their applications in industry. For example, some of the more specialized you are, what you'll find is not only more opportunity in any market you're going into, but also, of course, the range of companies that are supplying in that market, or that you're going to be competing with, is reduced. So I think there are areas like that. The other sector that I'd point out is on the construction side, both in terms of and companies running up against production constraints, both physically, but also in terms of skilled people. What I see across the United States in many sectors of manufacturing, many sectors of industry, are real capacity constraints because of shortages of skilled labor. Now, we face many of these capacity constraints ourselves.
Right.
But I would think, I think from what I'm hearing from a number of our counterparts in the United States, is that this is already putting on pretty significant constraints on their ability to expand. So again, opportunity for Canadian companies to perhaps not only enter the market, but or expand their business in the United States. But again, it really is. I wouldn't. I think everybody has emphasized the fact that it's not good enough that the Canadian dollar is down. Don't look at that as a silver bullet. I would say the same thing in terms of the capacity constraints that are there. There are some in particular markets, but it's so important to understand what those markets are, the purchasing patterns in those markets, and the key players, both in terms of who the customers are, who the competition is, and also who some of the partners, or who are the companies that you could possibly partner with to develop some form of a share in adding value in North American supply chains.
Right. For some companies, branding is what will keep them alive, right? So I'm thinking that maybe the fact that the currencies at our advantage right now is a way in, maybe, and it's a way to start developing the brand in the U.S., right? It could be just a starting point to then develop into being a successful company in the U.S. So Gary, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, just, I mean, Jason pretty well covered it, but the capacity issue in the U.S. really creates a couple of opportunities. When the manufacturing capacity, they're basically reached and they can't manufacture more, there's opportunities for Canadian companies to fill that gap with the finished product. But when the capital investment starts to increase the manufacturing capacity, there's opportunities for Canadians to take part in that as well, and equipment, robotics, automated manufacturing processes, there can be opportunities there. So not just the finished product, but actually when the build-out of manufacturing capacity takes place, there's opportunities there as well. Excellent.
Melanie, I wanted to add one thing too, and it's not exactly an issue about capacity, but in another sense it is. What we're seeing right now, because of the slow market growth around the world, tremendous competition around the world, is that companies are looking to find suppliers for their sort of innovation pipeline. And what I mean by that is that still there's tremendous amount of investment in research and development going on, but companies are looking to acquire products or new technologies or partners and they're looking to do that much more than ever before, simply because of the risk involved in new product development, but also the speed they require to bring new technologies onto the market and remain competitive themselves. So what we are seeing on the part of a lot of the larger U.S. companies is a much more open system for partnering, for identifying companies with potential technologies, IT applications, manufacturing and materials technologies, and new product development as well. So that's a tremendous opportunity for Canadian companies, and particularly for companies that have a unique technology, a unique service, to find partners, to find potential customers in the U.S. market, and perhaps not even starting in the U.S., but connecting to some of the multinationals that are operating already in Canada.
That's great insights. So the next question is someone that asks, what is the best way or a good way to locate manufacturers rep in the U.S.? So Bill, I'll turn that to you.
Yeah, I can jump on that further. One of the major guides that can assist Canadian companies in finding a rep in the United States is published by MANA, M-A-N-A. It's the Manufacturers Agents National Association. So this is an association of manufacturers reps, and they have a guide and a website where you can actually locate a rep by sector. So that's one way. And the second way is, as I mentioned before, you can contact either myself or our offices in the United States, the Canadian trade offices in the U.S., which will have lists of qualified distributors, agents, or reps by sector. So that's two ways the company can contact manufacturers reps. The MANA, I believe their website is MANA Online, and the other is through the Canadian Trade Commissioner Service in our offices in the United States.
Melanie, I think, this is Isaac. I guess the only thing I'd add is, we've spoken about industry conferences quite a bit. Those could be a great resource for small and medium-sized businesses. Get out to that industry conference. Usually those manufacturer reps or distributors will be there themselves, so you could actually meet them. But you'll also have the opportunity to speak to their customers, their other vendors or suppliers, and that'll give you really great insight into whether they're people that you want representing your brand in that market.
Thank you. That's a great, fair point that you brought forward. So your companies are pretty new still, Isaac. So in the beginning, I'm assuming there's always like kind of a financing challenge that's brought with being a startup company. Were you successful in finding solutions or financing means to help you attend these trade conference and these the trade shows in the beginning?
So the answer is I know they're out there. We didn't leverage them. We invested our own money to basically attend those shows out of the gate. But I know that there are a number of solutions. I can't point to them. We didn't use them.
Okay, so back to the financing piece, though, you did mention that you sometimes work 8 months in advance to be able to have the financing means to be able to take on a big contract. So tell us a bit about what steps you took and who you spoke with to make sure that you were ready to take on the big orders.
So just to be clear, it's not even starting the process of getting a deal done 8 months in advance. It's more learning what's out there, explore your options. Someone earlier, I think, said if you're attacking the U.S., U.S. bank is probably a great option. To actually locate a bank, build those relationships, to take that from start to finish and have financing in place could be a long time frame as a Canadian company. There's also a whole host of, I guess you could call them alternative lenders, basically, private debt providers that are willing to take on a bit more risk when you're talking about exporting and going into a new market. We have worked really successfully with Canadian banks. We work with one in particular and we have a great relationship with them. They've been supportive. And then EDC, I think we've participated in now 2 programs with the EDC, both the Export Guarantee Program, which has facilitated a lot of our growth in Canada Pooch, and some direct lending programs as well, which have really helped us take open farms to the next level.
Thank you. So next question is for Jason. Someone here asks, are you expecting the interest rates in the U.S. to increase in the near future? And what would be the effect on Canada?
Well, I am expecting them to increase, not a lot, but I think the stronger growth, stronger consumer growth is going to allow the Fed to begin to increase their short-term lending rate, and again, not by very much. But I think the impact, unfortunately, when they begin to do this, is probably a negative impact in terms of the stock market, perhaps other asset markets. Again, shouldn't last long, but the first what I'm expecting anyway, I think that will kind of hold the Canadian dollar where it is. I don't think that there's much downward pressure on the dollar unless something dreadfully goes wrong in the international economy, and that we see another price shock like the oil price shock or other commodity prices plunging, and that's the big news story over the past couple of years. But I think what we may see is a little bit more of a balance between the financial markets and real economic growth of real goods and services demand and trade, and I think that's a good thing. We're kind of there's been a disconnect between the stock market and, for instance, and the real economy, and the signal that we would see slightly higher interest rates will be treated negatively by the stock market. But that just is an example that there's a lot of money out there sloshing around that isn't really indicative of the real health of the economy. So I think things will balance out, and if anything, what we may see is a U.S. dollar that is not as highly overvalued in terms of other major currencies. So I think that's a little bit behind what Peter Hall at EDC is expecting in terms of a slightly higher Canadian dollar, but still in the area of around 75 to 79 cents this year.
Thank you for that. Next question is someone who asks whether a manufacturer rep is the same as a broker or distributor, particularly in the food industry. So what would be the difference, and what are they looking for? Bill, maybe?
I can handle that. In international trade terminology,
yes.
An agent or a rep is somebody who promotes your product, helps sell your product in another foreign market for a commission or a fee. A distributor is different. A distributor takes title. He buys the product from you, and then he or she would mark it up and sell it through their own company into the target market. So there are differences between the two.
Excellent. So depending on the industry, maybe there's one that's more favorable than the other?
It depends on the industry, exactly, yeah. Some industries use distributors, some use reps, some use neither. Some use resellers, others use direct sale to market, other industries use e-commerce. So it depends on the industry. It varies very widely in terms of sales to the U.S., which is the method they use to sell.
So bridging back to what's been said multiple times, do your research. Make sure that you know what you're doing and that you've seen what would be most favorable in your industry.
Absolutely, yes.
Next question is, our research into entering the U.S. market gets bogged down around the issues of invoicing, banking, and especially U.S. tax regulations. Is there a resource we should be looking at for help? Gary, can I throw that to you first?
Well, my first answer on that one is generally the Trade Commissioner Service, because they're basically across the country in the U.S. They've got 14 consulates and 45 trade commissioners, I believe, and that's essentially the kind of things they can help with is pointing you in the right direction, whether it's local legal counsel or accounting, tax help, that kind of thing. So I would go to the Trade Commissioner Service for help there.
So Bill, you'll be agreeing with that, correct?
I would generally agree with that, but it depends what kind of presence the Canadian company is taking in the United States. If it's contemplating a direct investment in the United States, in other words, opening up an office that would be a branch or subsidiary of your company, there are tax implications for that. There are legal implications for that, and it actually can vary by state. So the complexity varies by state, and the tax regulations vary by state. I want to make a very important note here. Canada and the United States have a tax treaty where we report each other's income on our own tax forms. That applies to federal or national taxation. It does not apply to state taxation. U.S. states are exempt from the trade treaty we have on the tax treaty with the U.S. and Canada. Okay, so U.S. states, or even in some cases municipalities, can apply taxes directly to Canadian companies that are legal, and they don't have to conform to the NAFTA because they're not part of the NAFTA agreement. So it's really important here to get tax advice and legal advice before you enter the United States. There are some states that are better to incorporate in than others. For example, some states have a very high state tax level, or they have more onerous regulatory requirements for Canadian or foreign investors. So it's really, really important to do that research ahead of time and find out the differences. And I think a good place to start off is probably your own bank. And there are also banks in Canada that are U.S. banks that work here in Canada. For example, Citibank, Fifth Third Bank, M&T. These are banks that have presence here in Canada that can help you facilitate your U.S.-Canada business. But a lot depends, as I said earlier, on what exactly your presence will be in the United States. Okay, but I would start off in that direction.
Thank you. So, Isaac, I'll turn the next question to you. You mentioned earlier the importance of legal compliance. Can you refer to any experts that you've used in terms of labeling and packaging compliance?
Sure. So, in our case, we do business across a huge number of states now. And each state, obviously from a tax perspective and things like that, but even from a packaging and regulatory perspective. And so we work with a number of consultants who are specific to our industry, who we were put in touch with through our network. We work with our lawyers and we have both a U.S. and a Canadian-based accountant to advise on tax matters. We work with a company called Milgram, based out of Montreal, but a national presence here in Canada that, in terms of clearing customs, dealing with any compliance issues around crossing borders, has really been a great partner to us over the years. Those are our primary sources of expertise, but it grows as you look to enter new markets. The packaging and labeling experts we started working with, we've really been adding them over the last 18 months as we've entered the U.S. in a more serious way.
Excellent. Thank you. I will add that the third webinars in this series will be touching on compliance a little more, so please join us on December 3rd for more information on that. I think we have time for just the one more question. So if we haven't had time to answer yours today, I see a lot coming down here. Hold tight. I will let you know how to send in your question and get an answer later. So our last question for today is to Gary, maybe, and I can add to that too. We are a Richmond Hill, Ontario-based manufacturer and have recently secured an order from a major U.S. retailer who at EDC in our local market is the primary contact, and who should they call to address financing options?
I don't know off the top of my head who the Richmond Hill account manager is, but we cover the country geographically by region. I know on edc.ca you can check and see where our offices are. There's an office in downtown Toronto would probably be the office that covers Richmond Hill. So that would be the best place to look for a quick answer.
Right, so call in the regional office or simply calling the 1-800 number that's available on the website, and that would kind of lead you through to the appropriate party at the end of the day.
And they can connect you with who you need to talk to internally at EDC.
Absolutely. So that's all the time we have for today. But if we didn't get to your question, please feel free to contact us by email at info@edc.ca. That's info@edc.ca, or you can call us at 1-800-229-0575. Once again, that's 1-800-229-0575. And don't forget to tune in to our last webinars in this series. As I mentioned, the next one is on December 3rd, and it's all about overcoming different trade barriers. So hope to see you then, and thank you so much for joining us today.